My name is Fonda Wells. I'm 34 years old, and I do math for a living. 8 days before my wedding, my dad called me on my lunch break and canceled every dollar he had promised for it. $40,000, pledged in front of the whole family, so he could fund my brother's new business instead. He didn't apologize. He said, "Figure it out. You're the responsible one," and hung up while I was still holding my sandwich. I didn't beg. I didn't post about it. I made exactly the moves you'd expect from a woman who balances books for a living, and then I made one phone call that changed the shape of that entire week. What that call set in motion ended with my father standing in an apple orchard under 100 strings of light, holding a check nobody wanted, begging me not to walk away. By then, I already had. This channel tells family drama stories about women who quietly stop carrying what was never theirs to carry, and what happens to the people who assumed they always would. If you've ever been handed the bill and called lucky, this story is yours too. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. To see how a father cancels his daughter's wedding with the calm of a man rescheduling a dentist appointment, you have to see the sign first. Camden Mills, Ohio. Population small enough that the diner knows your order. On the corner of Main and 3rd stands Wells & Son Hardware, and above the door hangs a hand-painted sign my great-grandfather would still recognize, because my grandfather Earl painted it. Wells & Son, not Wells & Family, not Wells & Children. The sign went up before my father was even born, which means the job description came before the man. Dad ran that store his whole life the way some men serve in a church. He opened at 7, closed at 6, and measured love the way he measured pipe. Cut exact, no waste. My mother, Linda, softened him for 36 years. She kept a rose bed behind the house, fat pink roses she babied like a third child, and when she laughed at him, he almost always backed down. She died 3 years ago. Breast cancer, 58 years old, gone in 16 months. After the funeral, the house went quiet in a way that scared me, so I started driving out from Dayton every weekend, 35 minutes each way, casseroles in the trunk, payroll spreadsheets in my bag. I told myself I was checking on him. The truth is, I was auditioning for a job that had already been posted, interviewed, and filled the day I was born. In my family, love was never said out loud. It was recorded. And in my family, the ink that counted was never in a birthday card. It was on a signature line. The spring after Mom died, Dad asked me to take a quick look at his taxes. I'm a CPA. Quick looks are how my week ends up gone. I spread his paperwork across the kitchen table and felt the floor tilt. He had borrowed against the house during Mom's treatment. His retirement account would not have survived 2 bad years. He was 61 then, standing behind a register 6 days a week, and the math said he could not stop. I didn't lecture him. I did what I do. I bought a blue ledger at his own store. He charged me for it, which should have told me everything. And I rebuilt his books line by line at that kitchen table, 1 Sunday a month, 3 years running. Then I went home to Dayton and set up an automatic transfer. $600, the first of every month, from my account into his, labeled House Fund. He never asked where it came from. He never mentioned it at all. And I let the silence stand because the silence protected his pride, and protecting his pride was apparently also my department. 36 months of that comes to $21,600, not counting the free bookkeeping for the store, which any firm in Dayton would have billed at more than that. You'd think a man would say, "Thank you." He said something else. He said it at Thanksgiving, at Easter, at the register while I fixed his sales tax filing. Fonda's the responsible one. He said it the way you'd point out a load-bearing wall, useful, permanent, not going anywhere. It took me 3 more years to hear what that sentence actually was, not a compliment, but a job title. And the job didn't pay. Now, my brother, Deacon Wells, 30 years old, the kind of charm you can warm your hands on. I want to be fair here, because this story is not about hating Deacon. Nobody hates Deacon. That's the whole engine of Deacon. He sells gym memberships, he remembers your kid's name, he hugs like he means it, and he has never once finished anything he started. There was the food truck the year he turned 24. Dad put in $3,000 for the deposit, and the truck sold exactly one summer of tacos before Deacon discovered the margins were a scam. There was the online supplement store, 4,000 of Dad's dollars, dissolved in 8 months. Each time, the family filed it under tuition. The boy's learning his legs, Dad would say, and the ledger in my head. Because there is always a ledger in my head. That's the defect I bring to this story. Quietly noted that I had paid for my own actual tuition. Loans in my name, waitressing shifts, a scholarship I renewed like my life depended on it. Because it did. Nobody ever called my degree an investment in the family. It was just Fonda being Fonda, responsible. Here's the thing I need you to understand, because everything later grows from this root. Dad wasn't cruel to me and sweet to Deacon. It was cleaner than that, and colder. Money flowed toward Deacon because Deacon might someday carry the name somewhere. Money did not flow toward me because I was the place other things flowed through. One of us was an investment, the other was infrastructure. At Thanksgiving that year, Deacon leaned back and said he'd found a big one this time. I remember Dad set down his fork. I remember. I did not. I met Micah Hale 4 years ago at the Camden Mills Farmers Market, where he was arguing gently with a 9-year-old about whether a Honeycrisp counts as dessert. He's 36, teaches agriculture at the high school, and is built out of the kind of patience you only get from working with teenagers in orchards. His parents, Ruth and Sam, own Hale Orchards, 15 minutes past town. 40 acres of apples, a farmhouse, and a cider barn with rafters like a church. The first time Micah brought me to Sunday dinner, I did what I always do in a family kitchen. I stood up to clear plates before I'd finished eating. Ruth put one hand on my shoulder and pointed at my chair, and I sat there feeling like a machine somebody had unplugged, unsure what I was for. 2 years ago, I found out their old bookkeeper had botched 3/4 of payroll filings, and the notices from the IRS were stacking up on Ruth's counter like storm warnings. I took the whole mess home. 3 weekends, a legal pad, and some very strong coffee later, it was fixed. Penalties abated. Everything clean. Ruth tried to pay me. I refused. Because of course, I refused. Free labor was my native language. She looked at me for a long second, the way she inspects fruit for bruising, and said, "Then we owe you. And I don't carry debts." I laughed it off. File that sentence away. At the Hale table, nobody kept score out loud, and it confused me the way silence confuses people raised near highways. I kept waiting for the invoice. It never came. Then, in April of last year, Micah proposed in the orchard, and I said yes, before he finished the question. A week after the proposal, Dad hosted Sunday dinner, which should have been my first clue, because Dad does not host. Pot roast, the good plates, Deacon and Aunt Carol both summoned. Between dinner and pie, my father stood up, tapped his water glass with a knuckle, and made an announcement in the voice he uses for store inventory. "Your mother made me promise something before she passed," he said. "She said, whatever it costs, give Fonda her day." He looked at me the way he looks at a level bubble, checking for true. "So I'm paying for this wedding. $40,000, a Wells wedding, done right." Aunt Carol actually applauded. Deacon whistled and said, "Big spender." And Dad allowed himself one small smile, the smile of a man whose accounts are in order. And me? I'm embarrassed to tell you what I felt, but you're here for the truth. So, I felt chosen. A self-made, licensed professional who owned her own condo, and one sentence from that man landed on me like sunlight on a plant that had been growing in a parking garage. Mom's roses were blooming outside the window behind him. I remember thinking she had reached across whatever distance there is and pried his wallet open, and I loved them both so hard my chest hurt. I should have asked one professional question that night. Just one. I ask it of strangers every day at work. I did not ask it of my father, because daughters want to believe, and belief is the one-line item I've never learned to audit. My dad's promises always came in a very large font. The fine print took another year to load. We planned a June wedding, 14 months out. The Grandview Ballroom in Dayton, chandeliers, a terrace, an event manager named Tessa, who ran her calendar like air traffic control. Dad paid the deposits himself over that first year. $5,000 to the Grandview, $2,500 to the caterer, $800 to the band, $700 to the florist. $9,000 down, and he drove to each vendor in person to hand over the checks, because that's how a Wells does it, which left $31,000 in final balances. And here is the part of wedding math nobody warns you about. Almost all of it comes due in the last 2 weeks. Venue balance? $14,500. Caterer, $9,800. Photographer, $2,400. Band, another $2,400. Florist, $1,900. I know these numbers the way you know a phone number from childhood. At the tasting last fall, I tried, professionally, gently, to fix the structure. I suggested Dad move the full amount into a joint wedding account up front, or let me co-sign the vendor contracts so either of us could pay. He set down his fork in front of Tessa and the little plates of chicken and said, loud enough for the sommelier, "Wells men settle their own accounts." Then he smiled at Tessa. "Bill me directly. All of it." So the contracts carried his signature, and the billing went to his address, and pushing harder would have meant torching the wedding over a hypothetical. But I want this on the record because it matters later. I saw the flag. I didn't trust the promise blindly. That same week, I opened a separate savings account and started feeding it hard. Bonuses, tax season overtime, my old vacation budget. By this spring, it held $22,000. I told no one, not even Micah. Quiet money for a loud day just in case. Then Deacon walked into the hardware store carrying a folder with a logo on it. The folder said Flex House Fitness, and it made its public debut at Easter dinner. Deacon spread glossy brochures between the ham and the deviled eggs like a man dealing blackjack. A franchise gym, he explained. 24-hour access, an app, territory rights to the whole county. "It's not a job," he said, eyes shining. "It's equity. It's a name on a door." I watched my father across that table, and I watched a lamp turn on behind his face. 64 years of squinting at the world, and suddenly, here was a sentence shaped exactly like the hole in him. A name on a door. Dad asked practical questions. Build-out costs, the franchise fee, what the bank wanted to see. Deacon had answers the way brochures have answers. Then Dad asked the question that should have made me put down my dinner roll. "How much?" he said slowly. "To put the Wells name on the door?" Deacon grinned and said they could talk after pie. They talked after pie. I was in the kitchen scrubbing the roasting pan, my assigned seat, historically. And through the door, I caught pieces. Territory. Lease. And one term that doesn't belong in a family kitchen. Liquidity. When a 64-year-old hardware man starts using the word liquidity, somebody nearby has been rehearsing him. I dried my hands and told myself what worried women tell themselves. The wedding money was safe, because he had promised it in front of everyone, and my father had never once broken his word in public. Then I stood in the pantry doorway and opened my banking app, and looked at my quiet $22,000, and did not entirely know why. My hands knew before I did. Hands usually do. Through the spring, my father began to evaporate. He missed the suit fitting in April. Stores busy. He skipped the final venue walkthrough in May, the one where Tessa walks you down the aisle path and you cry a little in an empty ballroom. I did that walk with Micah and my phone, texting Dad photos he answered 6 hours later with a single thumbs up. Whenever I called the house, he was, "In a meeting with your brother and a fella from the bank." A fella from the bank. My father, who paid cash for his truck out of a coffee can philosophy, now had a fella. Twice I asked him straight, "Dad, we're 8 weeks out. The big balances hit the same week as the wedding. Are we good?" And twice he gave me the same answer, word for word, in the tone he uses when a customer questions a price. The money's set aside. A Wells keeps his word. I want you to hold on to that sentence like I did. I balanced it against 34 years of evidence. The man had never bounced a check, never stiffed a supplier, never borrowed what he couldn't cover. Every audit I ran on his character came back clean. That's the trap nobody warns the responsible ones about. We check the numbers. We don't think to check the category. Because the whole time I was verifying whether my father kept promises, the real question was which ledger he'd filed me under. Then, at Deacon's birthday cookout in late May, Aunt Carol leaned into my shoulder, smelling like white wine and secrets, and said, "Be patient with your father, honey. He's making a big move for this family." I said, "What move?" She winked at me. She actually winked. 2 weeks out, I did what I do for clients in trouble. I built a payment calendar and put it where the money could see it. 1 page, 5 lines. Venue balance, $14,500. Due the Friday before the wedding, with a hard note from Tessa. The Grandview had a corporate gala on a waitlist for our date, so the deadline was a cliff, not a suggestion. Caterer, 9,800. Due Wednesday with the final head count. Photographer, 2,400. Band, 2,400. Florist, 1,900. $31,000 in 8 days, all of it flowing to contracts with my father's name at the bottom. I emailed him the calendar. I texted him each invoice as it arrived, with due dates in bold. He replied with thumbs ups, 4 of them over 6 days, 1 per invoice, like a man stamping paperwork he isn't reading. I file taxes for a living. I know exactly what a thumbs up is worth as documentation. On the phone that Wednesday, he was cheerful, distracted, papers rustling. "Stop worrying," he said. "It's handled. 140 guests, my mother's roses ordered for the centerpieces, and it's handled." If you've ever been the family's designated adult, the one who gets handed every bill, every crisis, every aging parent, while somebody else gets handed the applause, I want you to do something for me right now. Put in the comments the job you were assigned and never applied for. I read everyone, because for 34 years I thought my position was rare, and this channel taught me it's the most common unpaid job in America. So subscribe if you haven't. You're going to want to see what I did with my resignation. That Friday, 8 days before the wedding, my phone lit up at 12:40 in the afternoon. Dad. I was in the break room at Harmon & Cole with half a turkey sandwich and a coworker microwaving fish, which is the level of glamour I want you to picture while my life rearranged itself. I answered on speaker without thinking. It's how accountants eat lunch. Fonda. Not honey. Not sweetheart. The inventory voice. I need to tell you about a change with the wedding money. Change. In my business, that word is a fire alarm wearing a sweater. I'm putting the rest of it, the 31, into your brother's business. Flex House needs the capital now, or he loses the territory. The lease is signed. There's no undoing it. Somewhere behind me, the microwave beeped and beeped. I ask the only questions that ever matter in the voice I use for audits, because that voice holds when the rest of me doesn't. Has it already moved? How much? A pause, half a beat too long. It's committed, he said. All of it. A wedding is one day, Fonda. A business carries the name. You'll understand when you see what your brother builds. I said the wedding was in 8 days. I said the venue balance alone was $14,500, due in 7. I said it the way I'd brief a client, flat and clean, giving him one last exit ramp back into being my father. And my dad, the man my dying mother made swear to give me my day, exhaled the sigh he saves for customers who want a discount, and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. Figure it out. You're the responsible one. Then he hung up. The coworker with the fish stood frozen by the microwave, fork in the air, mouthing, "Oh my God." I looked down at the sandwich in my hand. Grief could wait. Invoices don't. I threw out the sandwich, walked to my desk, and opened a spreadsheet. Here is what the next 3 hours looked like, because revenge stories love to skip the part where the woman sits alone with a calculator, and that part is the story. I called Tessa at the Grandview. She was kind and she was surgical. My father had phoned that morning, before he even called me, to withdraw as payer. The Grandview could hold our date until Monday at noon. After that, full remaining balance or the corporate gala takes the ballroom, per the contract he signed. I called the caterer. Final payment Wednesday. No extensions in June, their busiest month. Band and florist. Same week. Smaller cliffs. Then I opened my quiet account and looked at my $22,000. saved sandwich by sandwich for exactly this ambush, and ran the number I already knew. 22 against 31. 9,000 short across that 1 week, with the first cliff at Monday noon and the caterer 2 days behind it. I had prepared for my father to wobble. I had not prepared for him to detonate the entire structure from inside, a week out, after locking every contract to his own signature so that no bank, no vendor, and no amount of my competence could root around him in time. You can't refinance a Friday. Micah drove straight to my condo when I called. He read my one-page calendar in silence, and I watched the gentlest man in Ohio fold his hands so they'd stop doing something else. "We'll elope," he said finally. "Tomorrow. I don't need a ballroom. I need you." And I almost said yes. I want to be honest about how close it was. But quitting quietly would have taught my family one more time that Fonda absorbs, Fonda adjusts, Fonda figures it out alone in the dark. Instead, I stood up and got my keys. "Where are you going?" Micah asked. 35 minutes east, I told him. Not to beg, to audit. They were both at the kitchen table when I walked in, Dad with coffee, Deacon with spreadsheets printed in color, which tells you who was selling and who was buying. Nobody stood up. "Fonda?" Dad said, wary, like I was a health inspector. I stayed calm, because calm is my mother tongue. I asked to see the project account. Deacon, bless his salesman heart, was proud of it. He turned his laptop around to show me FlexHouse's funding timeline, and that is how I learned the truth my father had skipped on the phone. The $31,000 hadn't moved that morning. It had moved 2 months ago. April 9th. Wired into the franchise project account while I was addressing invitations at my kitchen counter. Every thumbs up he'd sent me since. Every "it's handled." Every "A. Wells keeps his word." The money was already gone behind all of it. The Friday phone call wasn't a decision. It was a disclosure, timed for the exact week when every deadline had already locked and no responsible person could unwind it. My father hadn't panicked. He had scheduled me. I looked at him and asked why he lied for 2 months, and Ray Wells folded his hands like a man about to say grace and gave me his creed, patient and warm, absolutely certain he was being a good father. "Because you'd have worried it to death. Fonda, look at me. Your brother needs a running start. You've never needed anyone. That's your gift. You land on your feet. You always have. It's why I never worry about you." There it was. 34 years, notarized. The reward for carrying everything is that no one ever imagines you tired. I didn't argue. Arguing is for people who still think they're in a negotiation. My eyes went to the kitchen drawer by the phone, the one that has squeaked since before Mom died. Inside that drawer, under the takeout menus, lived a blue ledger. Dollar store cover, cheap paper. I'd bought it at his own register 3 years ago, and he'd rung it up without irony. Inside it, in my handwriting, was the whole hidden plumbing of Ray Wells's life. The refinance schedule from Mom's treatment, the store's quarterly taxes, the retirement projections I rebuilt every January, utilities I'd negotiated, insurance I'd rebid, the roof estimate, the truck loan I'd talked him out of, 3 years of Sundays, the operating manual for a man who told the county he'd never needed help from a soul. While Deacon walked Dad through projected first-year revenue, a chart with an arrow on it, and the arrow went up. Imagine that. I opened the squeaky drawer, took out the ledger, and closed it in my bag. No speech. No door slam. Neither of them looked up. That was the part I'd counted on, and it still landed like a diagnosis. The infrastructure is invisible right up until the morning it stops working. In our family, I finally understood at that table. Responsible was just the word for whoever picked up the check. I said I had to go, and Dad said, "We'll see you at the wedding, if you get it sorted." If, like it was my paperwork error, and I was still $5,000 and one venue short of a life. I drove out past the rosebed my mother left him. At the red light on Route 9, I opened my banking app, found the automatic transfer marked House Fund, $600 due to move in 5 days, and pressed Cancel Autopay before the light turned green. The app asked if I was sure. "Honey, I have never been more audited in a decision in my life. Confirm. Saturday morning, I tried the one door left. My brother. I bought him coffee in Camden Mills and made him an offer so reasonable it embarrasses me now. I didn't ask him to give the money back. I asked him to defer. Push his build out 6 months. Let the 31 flow where it was promised first. Open Flex House in January instead of July. Same gym. Same door. Same name on it. He stirred his oat milk like it owed him money and explained gently, as if to a client who didn't understand markets, that the franchise window was fixed, the lease was signed, and January was a dead month for fitness psychology. Then he reached across the table and squeezed my forearm with genuine, undiluted affection. I need you to believe he meant it. That's what makes it worse. And said, "You'll figure it out. You always do." His father's sentence, in his mouth, wearing a smile. Heirlooms travel like that. The apple and the tree aren't a metaphor in my family. They're a supply chain. Then, and I promise this happened, he asked if I'd have time after the honeymoon to look over the gym's books. "Since you're basically family CFO," he said, laughing. I looked at my little brother, the boy I'd taught long division, whose security deposit I'd covered at 22 and never mentioned since, and I felt the exact click a lock makes when it stops being a door and becomes a wall. I told him congratulations on the gym. I meant it the way you congratulate weather. That night, Aunt Carol lit up the family group chat like a county fair. "Everyone needs to calm down. Fonda is making this whole thing about money." I read it twice. The woman said it about the person who wasn't getting any. By Sunday, the Wells family opinion machine was running at full capacity, and I got to listen to it decide what had happened to me. Aunt Carol called first, pastoral and syrupy. "Sweetheart, weigh it out. A party lasts one day. A business feeds this family for generations. Your daddy is thinking about the Wells name." I asked her whose name was on the invoices due Wednesday. She sighed the sigh of a woman who has never once been the collateral. 2 cousins texted variations of "family is complicated," the official flag of people who've picked a side and want credit for neutrality. Nobody called Deacon to ask him anything. His part was already filed under ambition, mine under drama. That's how it works in families like mine. The loud ask gets called a vision, and the quiet bleeding gets called a mood. I didn't fight in the group chat. I've watched women try to win a jury that was seated before they were born. I wasn't going to spend my week on it. But that night was the low tide of the whole thing. Micah found me at my kitchen counter at 1 a.m. with the spreadsheet open, not crying, just still. Running scenarios the way other people say rosaries. Elope in the courthouse Tuesday. Postpone a year and lose every deposit. Pay the Grandview myself at noon and stand in a paid ballroom by Wednesday with no caterer and nothing left for the rest. Beg the Grandview for a payment plan their contract didn't allow. He wrapped around me from behind and said, "Whatever you choose it for us, not against them." Which is the whole man in a single sentence. I fell asleep on that. And at 9 the next morning, Tessa called from the Grandview, and her voice had the sound people make when they've been asked to read something out loud that they didn't write. The corporate gala had wired a hold on the ballroom Sunday night, a full day before my Monday noon cliff. Legally, the Grandview waited until noon. Commercially, it was over the moment somebody else's money arrived without conditions. At 12:06 on Monday, Tessa called again to say the date was released, and that she was sorry in a way that sounded like she'd argued with someone about it. There's a strange stillness that comes when the worst confirmed thing replaces all the maybes. 6 days before my wedding, I had no venue, a caterer counting down to Wednesday, a photographer and band and florist I could keep only if I paid them by Friday, and $22,000 that had just become both too little and, suddenly, exactly enough, depending on one question I hadn't let myself ask yet. But the universe wasn't done salting the field. Under the contract, a released date triggered a partial refund of the deposit, $2,000, payable to the signer. Tessa, required to disclosed. The refund would go to Raymond Wells. I found out later from Aunt Carol, who reported it as good news, that Dad had signed that 2,000 straight over to Flex House the same week. My canceled wedding was now, itemized and literal, a line item in my brother's gym. I sat in my car in the Grandview parking lot for a while, looking through the glass at the sample table settings in the lobby, the little card that still said, Wells Hale June. And then the stillness handed me something better than tears, an inventory, because there was exactly one number left in my phone that could change the shape of that week. And it didn't belong to a vendor, a bank, or anyone named Wells. I want to slow down here, because the hardest part of this story wasn't the money. That Monday night, I sat on my condo floor with the bank statement printed out. Old school, paper, the way I trust things. And for the first time in my adult life, the numbers and I had nothing to say to each other. $22,000. Enough to survive the ambush, not enough to fix it alone. And alone was the load-bearing word, because alone was my entire operating system. When I was 12, my 6th grade class went to Washington, D.C., and money was tight that year, and I overheard my parents in the kitchen deciding Deacon's baseball camp mattered more because he needs the structure. Nobody told me no. I just understood, the way responsible children understand, and I sold lemon bars outside Dad's store for 5 weekends until I'd covered my own trip. My mother cried when she found the coffee can of ones. My father told the story at the register for years, proud as a rooster. That's Fonda, she figures it out. I built a self out of that story. Never ask, never owe, never be the reason anyone sighs. It got me a license, a condo, a retirement account my father would weep over. It also got me here, 34, 6 days out, mathematically unable to save my own wedding without saying a sentence I had never once said out loud to anyone. In our family, responsible was just the word for whoever picked up the check, and I finally saw the fine print on my own contract. The check picker never gets to need one. My thumb hovered over Ruth Hale's name for a long, stupid, sacred minute. Asking was going to cost me the only version of myself I knew how to be. I pressed call. Ruth picked up on the second ring because farm people answer phones like the barn might be on fire. Fonda, everything all right? And I opened my mouth to deliver the composed, minimized, pre-shrunk version I drafted in my head. A small hiccup with the venue, just wondering if... And instead my voice did something it had never done on a phone call in my professional life. It stopped. Full seconds of nothing, while I relearned breathing. Ruth didn't fill the silence. She waited, the way you wait for a skittish animal to cross a road. And then I said it. The whole thing. Plain. My father canceled the money 8 days out and gave it to my brother's gym. The Grandview was gone as of noon. The caterer's deadline was Wednesday. And, here the sentence I'd never said in 34 years finally cleared my teeth. I need help. I can't do this one alone. What Ruth Hale did not do next matters as much as what she did. She didn't gasp. She didn't audition her outrage or make me perform my pain twice. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear a screen door and evening birds. And then she said, calm as a Tuesday. Then it settled. Bring the wedding to the orchard. I started to object on reflex. The barns for the fall season, the logistics, the cost, I could pay for. And Ruth cut through all of it with a voice I felt in my collarbones. Fonda, stop. You don't have to earn a seat at this table. I sat down on my kitchen floor, right there on the tile, and cried like drainage, like something unclogging after 30 years. She stayed on the line and didn't rush me. Then she said the sentence that started the avalanche. I'm going to make some calls. Sam's already getting the tape measure. It was 9 at night. That woman's phone tree was faster than my father's wire transfer. Tuesday morning, I drove out to Hale Orchards and found a small civilization assembling. Sam and Micah's 2 brothers were hauling fall festival tables out of the cider barn and power washing 40 years of apple dust into the sunlight. A neighbor showed up with a flatbed of folding chairs from the church hall. Somebody's teenage sons were untangling string lights down the center aisle of trees like a bomb squad. Ruth stood in the middle with a clipboard, running it all in farm wife shorthand, and when she saw me, she pointed at a chair and said, "Sit. Drink coffee. You're the bride. not the contractor. Old me would have grabbed a rake to prove I deserved the rescue. New me sat for a full 11 minutes before relapsing, which Ruth noticed and forgave. Then she and I did the one part I could do better than anyone alive. We rebuilt the budget at her kitchen table. My quiet $22,000 finally got its war. $7,800 to a barbecue caterer Ruth had fed at every harvest for a decade, who answered on the first ring and moved a Sunday job to fit us. $2,400 kept my photographer. $2,400 kept the band. $1,100 to a farm florist, dahlias and whatever the orchard was willing to give. $3,600 for the tent, tables, linens, lights. $1,700 for the dress alterations and the 100 small fires, every wedding sets. $19,000 total, spent by Friday, every dollar mine, every receipt in my own name for once in my life. If you're listening to this while being the person everyone else calls when it breaks, I want you to notice what actually saved this wedding. Not a lottery ticket, a phone call I almost didn't make. Somewhere out there is a Ruth who'd answer yours. Subscribe if you needed to hear that today, because the second half of this story is for you. That afternoon, Aunt Carol's Buick crunched up my parents' gravel and left a cardboard box outside my condo door in Dayton by evening, labeled in Dad's block letters, Fonda, Closet. The box was pure Ray Wells passive grammar, no note, just my childhood evicted in bubble wrap. Science fair ribbons, a jewelry box with a ballerina that no longer spun. He was clearing my room 6 days before my wedding and calling it storage. I nearly set the whole thing in the donation pile unopened, and then I saw the shoebox wedged at the bottom, and the shoebox wasn't mine. Inside was a stack of photographs of a storefront I'd never seen. Ray's Supply, block letters on a strip mall sign 1 county over, and my father, 27 years old, sideburns, my exact stubborn chin, grinning in front of it like a man who'd just been paroled. I never knew. 34 years, and I never knew he'd tried to leave the sign. The store date said it lasted 14 months. Under the photos was a bank notice from the year it died, and under that, folded into eighths, like something he couldn't throw away or look at, a letter in handwriting sharp as a nail bin. From Earl Wells, my grandfather. I won't quote you all of it. The sentence that mattered, the one that explained my whole childhood, the one I'll never unread, said, "A man who needs saving isn't worth the rope. Come back and earn the sign." He went back. He earned the sign. He hung his own dream in a shoebox and spent 37 years being the son the sign demanded, and when his own boy came along with a folder and a logo, my father didn't see a risky Jim. He saw the parole he never got. For 1 long minute at my kitchen counter, I held that letter and I understood my father completely. The enforcer and the inmate of the same family religion. Understanding is not the same as excusing. I folded the letter back into its eighths, packed the shoebox shut, and put it by the door to return. He could keep his ghosts. He no longer got to make them mine. Then I looked at the calendar, and the calendar looked back. Tomorrow was the 1st of the month. For 3 years, $600 had arrived in my father's account on the 1st of every month, as invisible and reliable as water pressure. That Wednesday, 3 days before the wedding, it didn't. I was standing in the orchard holding a mason jar of dahlias when the first voicemail landed, and I let it. Voicemail 1, 2:15 in the afternoon, annoyed and breezy. Fonda, the bank's showing some kind of glitch with the house fund deposit. Have your bank look at it. Also, your aunt says the Hales are throwing you some kind of barn party. We should talk about how that looks. How it looks. I watered the dahlias. Voicemail 2 arrived at 9:40 that night, and it was a different man. The breeze was gone. I could hear the kitchen drawer squeak in the background, the empty drawer, and papers moving. A lot of papers, and my father's voice had the specific carefulness of a man reading his own x-rays. I've been going through the files tonight, the house fund, the refinance schedule. Long pause. Rustling. I didn't realize the deposits were, that it was you. All of it. The whole time. Call me back. I stood under the string lights Sam had just finished testing, and they clicked on all at once down the row of trees, and I did not call him back. Not out of cruelty, out of accuracy. For 3 years he'd been living in a house held up by a beam he'd never once looked at, and the correct thing, the responsible thing, was to let him stand in it and feel the load shift. Meanwhile, Camden Mills did what small towns do. By Thursday morning, everyone from the diner to the feed store knew the Wells wedding hadn't died. It had moved to the orchard, and it had grown. Aunt Carol called to fish. I was polite and useless. Thursday afternoon, I came out of my office in Dayton, and my father's truck was parked across 2 spaces in the visitor lot, and he was leaning against it, holding his hat like a farmer at a funeral. He'd driven 35 minutes to ambush me between meetings, which by Ray Wells standards was a grand romantic gesture. He led with logistics, because feelings enter my father's house through the service door. "Saturday," he said. "I'll wear the gray suit. I'm still walking you down the aisle." Not a question, not, "I'm sorry." A man reasserting a role, the way he'd restock a shelf, as if position could substitute for behavior, as if the aisle were his to walk regardless of what he'd burned on the way to it. I told him the ceremony had a plan, and the plan was set. I was walking myself. He blinked at that like I'd answered in a foreign currency. Then he got to the real errand. "And this bank glitch, the transfer. My guy says there's no error on their end, so it's something with the autopay. So if you just..." "It wasn't a glitch, Dad." Quiet. Level. The parking lot hummed with other people's normal afternoons. He studied me the way he'd study a machine that had always worked, and I watched him understand. Not the money part. The money part he'd figured out at that drawer Tuesday night. The forever part. "You're punishing me," he said. "You're being emotional about a business decision." I actually smiled, because after 34 years he'd finally used the right word in the wrong sentence. "No, Dad. This is me being unemotional about a business decision. You taught me how. I'm just not billing the family anymore. For anything. Ever again." I got in my car. He put his hand on my window ledge, and for 1 second the hardware store left his voice entirely, and what stood there was just an old man in a parking lot. "Your mother," he started. "Before she passed, she made me promise." I pulled out of the space, slow and careful, and let the sentence stand there holding its hat. Whatever he owed my mother, he could deliver it to my face on Saturday, if he had the nerve to come. Friday evening, the orchard turned gold, and we rehearsed a wedding that had no business existing. One long farm table under the lights, 30 people, brisket sandwiches on butcher paper because the caterer wanted to test the smoker. Micah's brothers had built an arch out of apple prunings, and it was, and I say this as a woman who'd paid a florist for professional swagged tulle at the Grandview, the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen with my name attached. Ruth stood up with a jelly glass of cider and said grace over the whole catastrophe, and then she looked down the table at me, in front of her sons and the neighbors and the church ladies who'd been strangers to me a week ago, and repeated it, slower this time so it would take. "You don't have to earn a seat at this table. Not tonight. Not ever. That's not how tables work here." 30 heads nodded like it was obvious, like it was gravity. I looked away so my mascara would survive, and my eyes landed on the little memory table by the arch, where that afternoon I'd set a framed photo of my mother laughing in her rose bed. Beside it stood one pink rose in a bud vase. Micah had driven to my father's house that morning while Dad was at the store, his one act of piracy, and cut it from her bushes, because a promise to a dead woman was getting kept that weekend, whether her husband participated or not. Late that night, back at my condo with my dress hanging on the closet door like a patient ghost, my phone buzzed. "Aunt Carol. He's coming tomorrow. Don't you dare make a scene." I looked at that text for a long time, 34 years of data, and they were still bracing for the wrong woman. I typed back, "I never do," turned off the lamp, and slept better than I had any statistical right to. In the trunk of my car, wrapped in a dish towel, the blue ledger waited like a wedding gift. Saturday came up soft and clear, dew on the orchard grass like the whole place had been polished overnight. I dressed in Ruth's farmhouse bedroom with the window open, listening to the band tune up somewhere behind the trees. And when Ruth asked, gently, who'd be walking me down, I said what I'd decided in the parking lot Thursday. No one. Not as a wound. As a fact with dignity in it. I'd carried myself this far. I could carry myself down 30 yards of grass. My bouquet was dahlias and orchard greenery, with one pink rose from my mother's bed at the center, riding right where my hands would hold it. 2:00. The aisle ran between the apple rows, and folding chairs from a church hall held 160 people, 20 more than the Grandview list. Neighbors and cider customers, and half the faculty of Camden Mills High had simply come, the way a town shows up when it's heard the whole story from 6 directions. I walked alone, and here's what nobody tells you about walking alone. It doesn't read as missing. It reads as arrived. Micah stood under the applewood arch crying before I'd cleared the 3rd row, which set off Sam, which set off strangers. The vows were short. He promised to be the place I put things down. I promised to actually put them down. His voice cracked on, every ordinary Tuesday, and mine held until Ruth blew her nose like a trumpet and the whole orchard laughed the tears loose. The kiss got a standing ovation from people sitting on borrowed chairs, and through all of it, one lane of my mind, the auditor, she never fully sleeps, kept watch on the gravel lane by the barn. Empty all afternoon. Not yet. The reception poured itself into the cider barn at dusk, and I need you to see it, because my father was about to. String lights in the rafters like a low, obedient sky. Long farm tables with white linen and mason jars of dahlias. Brisket and smoked chicken served family-style church lady pies stacked 3 deep on a dessert table that outgunned any 4-figure cake, and early apples in wooden bowls because Sam refused to let anyone leave without fruit. The band had asked me that morning for any special requests, and when the dancing opened, they played the old Patsy Cline number my mother used to hum deadheading her roses. I hadn't requested it. Micah had. I danced with my husband and let that ache be a guest instead of an intruder. Then something happened that I'm still not graceful about. People kept refilling my glass. Ruth's sister plated my food before I'd noticed I was hungry. A church lady I'd met on Tuesday took my empty dish out of my hand and told me to sit down and be celebrated. Every reflex I owned kept twitching toward the kitchen, and every time, somebody's hand steered me back toward my own wedding. It turns out being taken care of is a skill, and I was starting from 0, at 34, in a white dress. Deacon never came. His RSVP had said yes, but that afternoon he'd texted, "Site inspection? Can't move it? Crush it, sis," with a bicep emoji, which was somehow the most honest communication our family had produced all month. Aunt Carol did come, alone, in her funeral-adjacent pearls, sitting at the edge of it all doing inventory with her eyes. And at 8:40, by the clock over the cider press, headlights swept slow up the gravel lane and stopped. A truck door shut with a sound I'd know asleep. The band played on. My father had come to see the wedding he canceled. He stopped just inside the barn doors, at the exact seam where the dark ends and the light begins, and for a moment my father, a man I have never once seen hesitate on a threshold, stood there taking the census. The lights, the crowd, the tables, the town. He was wearing the gray suit, the one from Mom's funeral, and his hands were doing something I'd never seen them do, which was nothing. Just holding an envelope. Conversation nearest the door dropped first, then the drop spread table by table, the way frost moves. The band singer glanced at me mid-chorus. Sam Hale rose out of his chair. Not aggressive, just present. 63 years of orchard shoulders. And Ruth's hand found her husband's arm. And every one of those 160 people looked at the man in the doorway, and then, together, like the room shared one neck, at me. Here's what they were bracing for, because Aunt Carol's version had made the rounds. A scene. What they got was a bride crossing her own reception floor at an unhurried walk, kissing her husband's hand on the way, and meeting her father at the door like a hostess. "Dad? Fonda?" His voice had sawdust in it. "It's..." He took in the rafters again, and something moved through his face that I'd only ever seen him aim at balance sheets that wouldn't reconcile. Your mother would have... He couldn't finish it. He held out the envelope instead, because objects are my father's vocabulary. 31,000, he said, low and rushed. The franchise inspection got pushed. Most of it hadn't dispersed. I pulled it back. Broke a CD for the rest. It's all there. Every dollar I promised. The check trembled, just slightly, at the exact frequency of the string lights. Take it, my father said. Take it and come back. I looked at the envelope. Then I said, let's talk on the porch, Dad, and walked him out of my wedding's light, because whatever was about to happen, I would not let 160 people eat it with pie. The barn porch looked out on the lit rows of trees, music washing through the boards behind us. My father set the envelope on the railing between us like a chess move, and then, for the first time in my 34 years, Ray Wells came apart in front of me. Not weeping. Nothing so simple. Itemizing. I sat at that kitchen table Tuesday night, he said, with your ledger gone, and I tried to rebuild the books myself. Took me till 3 a.m. to get close. And there it was. $600 a month. 36 months. The refinance I thought I'd handled. The insurance I bragged about getting cheaper. You got it cheaper. I did the math, Fonda. His voice went somewhere I'd never heard it go. I'm 64 years old, and my retirement plan was you, and I never even looked at it straight until the water shut off. Out in the dark, the crickets kept the beat. And your mother? He gripped the railing. In the hospice, she took my hand and made me swear. Whatever it costs, give her her day. I told myself I kept that promise as long as I decided what it cost. That's the kind of math I do. He turned to me then, and his eyes were her eyes for one horrible, generous second, and my father begged. There's no gentler verb that's honest. Take the check. Come back to the table. Sundays. The books. I'll fix it with the vendors. I'll stand up at that microphone tonight and tell every soul in that barn it was me. Don't walk away from me, Fonda. You're the responsible. He caught it. He heard it leave the hangar and he caught it. Too late. And the last word just hung there over the railing between us, finally visible to us both at the same time, for exactly what it was. The price tag they'd hung on my chair. I stood quiet in my wedding dress. Everything I had wanted since I was 12 years old was on that porch, asking me to come home. Wait here, I said. I have something of yours in the car. I came back across the gravel carrying the dish towel bundle, and I watched my father's face do hope wrong. He thought I'd gone to get a pen for the deposit slip. I set the bundle in his hands and folded back the cloth, and there was the blue ledger, dollar store cover gone soft at the corners, 3 years of my Sundays inside in blue ink. Every number I carried since Mom died, I said. Refinance schedules tabbed in yellow. Quarterly taxes are the green tabs. The bookkeeper candidates are on the last page. 3 names, all local, all good. Any of them will take the store's account for $200 a month. He stared down at it, the way you'd stare at an X-ray of your own chest. Fonda, I don't want a bookkeeper. I know what you want, I said, and my voice stayed level, not because I'm cold, but because I had rehearsed this in the only courtroom that matters, the one in the car at red lights. You want it back the way it was? The way it was me paying to be your daughter. $600 a month, and the books, and the casseroles, and my job was to never need a thing. And last Friday, I finally got my performance review. 1 phone call, Dad. Between you and Elise. He flinched, and I let him. Then I pushed the envelope, gently, back across the railing until it touched his sleeve. I don't want the 31,000. The wedding's paid for. I paid for it. My savings. And people who showed up without being invoiced. If you stand at that microphone, you'll be doing it for you, not me. Here's what I want. He looked up. Keep the check. Fund the gym. Don't fund the gym. That's your ledger now. We're even. I finally figured it out. His face broke open at his own sentence coming home to him, and for a second he looked so much like the young man in front of Ray's Supply that my throat closed. There's cake inside, I said softer. Pecan pie, too. The church ladies outdid themselves. You're welcome to a plate and a seat. As a guest, Dad. As my father. Even. Just never again as the man who pays. Sam will walk you to your truck whenever you're ready. And then the cost of all of it arrived at once, because he nodded. Small, beaten, holding the ledger like an urn, and I understood the man who might someday just love me without an account attached had gotten as close as he was ever going to get tonight, and I'd turn the money down anyway. I cried exactly once at my wedding. Right there, briefly, facing the dark rows of apples so he couldn't see it land. Then I wiped it with the heel of my hand, the way my mother used to, and held the barn door open for my father. He stayed 10 minutes. He sat at the end of a farm table between a cider customer and one of Micah's cousins, a paper plate in front of him with a slice of wedding cake he ate about half of, and nobody made it easy, and nobody made it hard. No microphone, no confession. Ruth, who knew everything, poured his coffee herself and said only, "Glad you made it, Ray," which in farm country is an entire Supreme Court ruling. He watched me dance with my husband to a song he probably recognized from Mom's kitchen radio. I caught his eye once across the barn, over Micah's shoulder, and he raised his coffee an inch off the table, and I nodded. And that was the whole conversation. The most honest one we'd ever had. Then he stood, buttoned the funeral suit, shook Sam's hand at the door for a beat too long, and walked out into the dark with the blue ledger under his arm. Through the barn boards I heard the truck start, and gravel, and gone. Aunt Carol left soon after, no scene to report, which I imagine ruined her drive home. The party outlived them both by hours. Near midnight, when the band had gone acoustic and the church ladies were boxing pie for anyone with hands, Ruth found me by the dessert table and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear like I was one of hers, and said it one last time. "See? Never had to earn it." And I finally just said, "Thank you," with no counteroffer attached, which for me was the bigger vow of the two I made that day. Micah pulled me out for the last slow song. I put my head on my husband's shoulder, and for the first night in 3 years, nothing in my head was adding anything up. "It's been 7 months. Here's the accounting, because you've earned it." Flex House Fitness opened in July with a ribbon and a radio remote, and it runs the way I quietly projected. Memberships under target, Deacon pivoting quarterly, my father covering shortfalls out of the retirement he now actually has to think about. Dad is 64 and still opens the store at 7, 6 days a week, under a sign that says, "And Son," and the sun has never once stood behind that register. The sign stays up. Some things you don't get to fix. You just get to stop paying for them. He hired the second bookkeeper on my list. The woman, which surprised me and then didn't. He calls me every couple of weeks. We meet at the diner in Camden Mills, and we talk about the weather and the Bengals and which pipe fittings nobody makes right anymore. And when the checks come, the waitress splits them without being asked, because the whole diner knows the arrangement now. He has never brought another envelope. Once, in October, he said, out of nowhere, over meatloaf, "Your mother's roses went double this year. You could come cut some." From my father, that is a psalm. I went. I cut roses from my mother's bed with her pruning shears while he stood on the porch not supervising, and we did not discuss it, and it was the best afternoon we've had in 10 years. Deacon texted in November asking if I'd peek at the gym's books, family rate, and I replied with the name and hourly fee of a very good accountant at my firm. He responded with the crying, laughing face. He thinks I'm joking. The invoice will clarify. Aunt Carol tells anyone who holds still that Fonda got married in a barn and abandoned her father, and I've made peace with being the villain in the version of the story where the check writer is the victim. And the $600? It still moves on the 1st of every month. Same amount, same day, different destination. It goes into an account Micah and I opened the week after the honeymoon, labeled for a kid who doesn't exist yet, who will grow up at a table where the chairs are free. Sundays, we drive out to the orchard. Ruth won't let me clear plates until dessert's done, and I've stopped trying. Mostly. Last week, I sat there after dinner with a second cup of coffee, doing absolutely nothing for anybody, and realized some names live on doors, and some live in the way a room gets warmer when you walk in. I spent 34 years auditioning for the door. I quit and got the room. If love in your family has always arrived looking like an invoice, hear this from a woman who kept the books. Being the responsible one was never the price of your seat, because a table that charges you for your chair was never set for you. And the day you finally put the ledger down, you find out exactly who has been saving you a place all along. That's my story. One blue ledger, one phone call, one seat I never had to earn. If you've been your family's unpaid infrastructure, tell me in the comments what you finally stopped carrying. I read every single one. And if this story sat somewhere true, subscribe to because next week I'll bring you another woman who put the bill down and walked. Take care of yourself. You're allowed.